Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Spiritual Lessons from Harry Potter. And I'm a huge fan of this whole series, and I've really wanted to do this for a very long time. Me and my husband have read the series, and we always reflect on different points of it. So I'm so excited to share this with you all. Oh, so sweet. Thank you, Hannah. Your podcast interviews have helped me so much. Alhamdulillah. I'm so glad to hear it. Yes, I've been on several podcasts. If you click my free resources tab, you'll see all of the list of all the podcasts I've been on, which offers a ton of value. And I'm so glad that you are listening and benefiting. So in this series, we are using the book Harry Potter to not only enjoy like such an epic adventure, but to extract from it all the beautiful spiritual lessons that are there. And I really love doing this, as I said in the intro, because through stories, it becomes more memorable. It becomes more real. It's easier to understand how we can apply it to ourselves when we are hearing it from a story. So let's just dive right in. The book begins with The Sorcerer's Stone is the first book, and it begins with J.K. Rowling telling us and describing to us the Dursleys, which is Harry Potter's relatives. So it's his aunt, his uncle, and his cousin that he lives with. And they are described as being very ordinary and really actually priding themselves on being ordinary and fitting in and wanting to blend in with everyone. You know, they live in a middle class neighborhood. They're like keeping up with the Joneses, all of that. And this is important for us to remember because it's a natural desire. It's an all desire we all share to have that sense of belonging, that we want to belong, that we want to fit in with the crowd. We don't necessarily want to stand out, especially when we're younger. We want to, be amongst our peers. We don't want to stand out. And so the Dursleys, they're adults and they have a child, but they still are described as like really wanting to blend in. They don't like anything that's out of the ordinary and all of that. And on the day that the book opens, on the day that Harry Potter's parents have died, and how they died is a cause of celebration because, okay, I'm kind of messing it up, but it's on the day that Harry Potter's parents have died, which is also the day that an evil wizard named Lord Voldemort has been vanquished and disappeared, and he's been kind of having this reign of terror for like 10 years. So it's a day of celebration for the wizarding community. And I'm going to be going through this series like kind of assuming that you're familiar with the book. So even if you haven't read it or fully watched the movies, I'm assuming that you kind of get the gist of the story, that there's wizards and things like that. And if you want to read along with me, like do that. It's going to be so fun. It's going to be so fun. Okay, so Lord Voldemort has been vanquished, so the wizarding community is excited and celebrating. So instead of things being ordinary, the day is very extraordinary. There's owls flying all around. Wizards are out congregating, talking amongst themselves, and they're not wearing regular clothing. They're wearing their robes, so they're standing out. And so Mr. Dursley is noticing this, and he's like, I don't like what I'm seeing. Like, why are people acting weird? I don't like this. And then he also hears people mentioning the name Potter, which he knows is his sister-in-law's, last name. And he's like, oh, like, does that have... is that the Potter that we know? That's related to me? And he just dismisses it. He can't be like, Potter is a common last name. It can't be. Oh, thank you, Fari. And what I want to, again, pull out from that is that sometimes things will come into our experience, or we'll hear something, or we'll learn about something, we'll know something, and we're like, does that relate to me? And sometimes we're wrong, but there's other times where you can feel like this has something to do with me, and we kind of ignore it and push it away. Like, oh no, it can't be. It couldn't be about, it couldn't be about my in-laws. That couldn't be possible. Of course, it turns out that it is. And that lesson here is like, when you get that inkling of that something relates to you or might be about you, not to run away from it, not to trying to avoid it, because it will eventually catch up with you. So it's better to kind of look into it and investigate it now. Okay. Another part is then that Dumbledore is bringing Harry to live with the Dursleys. And when he does, Professor McGonagall is there, and she's like, "You're gonna leave him here, like, with these people? They're muggles. They're like the worst kind of muggles, and this is not gonna be a good place for him to be brought up. He's gonna be famous in the Wizarding world. Everyone's gonna know his name." And Dumbledore says, like, "Well, wouldn't it be better? I think it'll be better for him to grow up away from all of that, like famous for something he can't remember and didn't take any part, doesn't understand his role in. That's going to be too much for him. It's better for him to grow up away from that." And that lesson is that sometimes we are being protected, right? Which, when we learn about how Harry is treated at the Dursleys, it feels like, like it would have been better for him to have been with someone else. But, Dumbledore has his wisdom for why he's placed him there. And in that hardship that he's going to face, and in this unknowing of who he truly is, it's actually building within him some resilience and some strength that is going to support him for what he needs to do in the future. So for us, if there's something about your upbringing, your background, your history, your childhood, your family that you're like, I wish it could have been different, or I had the option for it to be different. If my parents had done this instead, or took me there instead, or whatever, it could have been different. Why did I suffer or go through the trauma or go through this experience that I went through? To know that in Allah's wisdom, there is benefit in it from you, and whatever that was, that you can pull from it the lessons, the learning, the strength, the wisdom that is going to support you in what you need to do in the future, right? It might be in this moment, and it might be in, your future moments, but to not lament about your past and your history and how things coulda, woulda, shoulda been. Okay. And then as he's, leaving baby Harry, Professor McGonagall sees his lightning-shaped scar on his head. And she's like, is there anything you can do about that? To Dumbledore. And Dumbledore's like, there's nothing I can do. And even if I could, I wouldn't remove that scar. He says, scars can come in very handy. And that's, again, just another way of saying, like, not only our physical scars, but our emotional scars, our spiritual scars can support us in the future. Trying to heal from those scars or remembering those wounds can support us in the future. Walaikum salam, Amreen. Okay, and that's how we are at chapter 1, right? And so it's like just a beautiful, great description of the Dursleys, how they're living, how they grew up, and it's really lets us know the type of upbringing that Harry Potter is going to receive when he's now left at the Dursleys as a baby. Okay, then chapter 2 is now 10 years later. Okay, so Harry is now 11 years old, and he has been treated basically as a second-class citizen in his own home, right? Like, his cousin gets all the love and attention, and they keep him in a broom closet, and they're just like ashamed of him and don't give him much, and just like basically tolerating him. He wears his cousin's hand-me-downs, all this stuff. And he's constantly told not to ask questions. Don't ask questions, don't ask questions. So he doesn't feel heard, seen, valued in this household. And things are happening to him that he doesn't understand or can't explain. So what's happening in chapter 2 is that it's Dudley's birthday, his cousin's birthday, and the person who usually watches Harry on Dudley's birthday can't. And so now he has an opportunity to go with Dudley to his birthday, which is going to be a trip to the zoo. And Harry's super excited because he's never been taken anywhere. And now his uncle comes to him and is like, I don't want any funny business. Don't let anything happen. And Harry's like, okay, I promise I won't. And he's like, thinking to himself, like, it's true, I don't make anything happen, but weird things happen around me. I can't explain it. And then it starts enumerating some of these weird things, like him being chased by Dudley and other bullies at school, and jumping, and his jump takes him up to the roof of the school building. Or his aunt being so frustrated with like how his hair is unruly that she basically almost shaves his head, and then the next day his hair has grown back fully. Or his aunt trying to make him wear a hideous sweater of Dudley's, and Harry resisting, and then the sweater shrinks. And so these weird things are happening, and he can't explain them, and he doesn't know how they're happening. But it's just that feeling of being off. And here, again, is to look in your own life at like some things, sometimes weird things happen to us, and we can't make sense of them. And because they're so weird, we can't explain them. We don't know what to say about them. So we kind of just brush over them. And this reminds me of what I always imagined about the Prophet ﷺ. Like, as a child, having all of these extraordinary experiences happen to him, right? And it's only once he becomes a prophet that he can tell all of those stories and that they all make sense. But probably you could imagine him growing up as a child and like, angels opened my chest and cleaned my heart. Like, people are going to be like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, this is very weird, and you can't explain it, and you don't know. And you were just a child, you were 5 years old, or you're traveling with a caravan, and, a cloud is only covering, protecting you from the sun, you and, your camel from the sun. Or, an elder looking for the seal of prophethood on your back and like, saying to you like, oh, I see the seal. Like, you don't know what that means, right? The Arabs were unfamiliar with all of the stories of previous prophets. So having these extraordinary experiences happen to him and just being like, okay, what do I do with this? Right? And to know that like, it can lead you somewhere. So again, our experiences don't have to be so miraculous or so extraordinary, but they can be little out of the ordinary things. And all I'm saying is don't discredit them. Don't just believe that, well, I don't know, that was just weird, let me just ignore it. Inshallah, it's going to lead you somewhere. And so Harry and his cousin are at the zoo, and they're looking at the reptile enclosure, and there's a snake, and Harry communicates with the snake. And the snake wants to be free, and then somehow the glass vanishes, and this boa constrictor now slithers out of the reptile cage. And this scene becomes important later, and it's important because it establishes that Harry can communicate with snakes, which we're going to learn more about later. I'm not spoiling everything, right? Okay. And he also notices that when he goes out in public, it seems like strangers recognize him. And he's like, the way they look at me, or they, sometimes they even come up and shake my hand, just like, what's going on, right? So these things in his childhood, right? He has one experience in his childhood of being like, mistreated and neglected, and how neglect is such a terrible form of abuse. And then we have another experience of weird things happening to him and people seeming to know him, and he's just kind of trying to navigate through all of it. And again, that point is that both can kind of coexist. All right, then we get to chapter 3. And this is where Harry gets his letters from Hogwarts. Oh, someone is saying, I saw the movies, but everything you just mentioned never came up in the movies. Okay, I haven't really watched the movies. And so we are going to be sticking to the books. And of course, books always have greater detail, more depth, more character development, more nuance, more insight into a thought process, more than just what visuals can show you. It's telling you how a person thinks, the subtleties, and all of those things. So we're going through the Harry Potter series focused on the books. If you've watched the movies, that's still great because that's going to give you a basis for understanding all of these things. And if you've never read the books and you're interested, and especially if you like the movies, read the books. There's so much more detail and depth there. And in my opinion, you're going to get more lessons, spiritual lessons from it because of all that detail and depth. So in chapter 3, Harry is getting his letter. What is it? He gets his letter from Hogwarts. But before he has a chance to open it, his uncle takes it away from him. And we see that his uncle and aunt recognize, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is a letter from Hogwarts. And at this point in the story, we don't really appreciate that they don't, what exactly is happening. But Harry has alluded to that, like, any mentions of magic or anything out of the ordinary or extraordinary really gets his aunt and uncle upset and agitated. So obviously going to a magical school is something that they would not be interested in. So Harry is receiving this letter, and Dudley, his uncle, is trying to keep it from him. And basically the main point here, right, is that even if all of the world tried to prevent you from receiving something that is meant to be yours, they cannot. You will receive it. What's meant for you will find you, right? So this goes on into chapter 4, but Uncle Vernon, right, first hides the letters, then boards up places, and then, is burning the letters and doing all of these things so that Harry will not receive this letter. And later on, in the next chapter, he is going to receive it. Let me see. Right? Yes. I'm just making sure because... And his uncle's also trying to run away and avoid it. His initial response was like, we're just going to ignore it, right? And again, this is the lesson for, like, if there's any problem in your life, any issue that you're facing, you cannot run away and hide from it. It will find you. It will catch up to you. You have to address it. And it's better to address it up front. Okay? And so that brings us to the end of chapter 3. Episode 2 will have chapters 4 and 5. Oh, someone has a question. Yes. Go ahead and ask. Sarah, you can ask your question. And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, let me just double check my notes while we wait for Sarah's question. If she's still on, I don't know. How do I check that? Okay, I'll give her another minute. Otherwise, I am starting a Harry Potter Instagram private chat. And if you want to get the link to that chat or be added to that chat, you can leave a comment under this video, or you can DM me and I will add you to that group chat where we'll be discussing even more. We can share screenshots of the books and video from the movie, whatever you want for us to extract more beautiful gems from this series. Okay, here's the question. How do you put yourself in a position to wait for what is meant for you? Okay, that's a lot. That's a big question. But basically it is, okay, Jillian, I will add you to the Harry Potter chat. The way to put yourself in that position is to kind of trust and know that it's coming, right? Whatever, like if you're making dua for something, you're making dua to get married, you're making dua for a new job, you're making dua for a different house, to just trust and know that it is coming, that your dua has been accepted and it is coming. And in that sense of knowing, now you're not in a waiting kind of passively, I'm just waiting and waiting. You're going to be more in a active sense of waiting. And what that means is that you're going to be going about your life in a positive expectations that, like, okay, it's coming. I'm just so excited. It's coming. And we can get more into that in another place, but that's kind of like the short answer to this question. How do you put self in the position. Yeah, because if you've been waiting for things to happen, if you're in the passive waiting, you're going to feel down. You have to be in that active, positive expectation waiting, because that's also going to lead you to inspired action. And that inspired action is going to support you to get what you want. And in fact, like, this is a beautiful example. This whole series, this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, but I felt that I couldn't do. I couldn't do because, you know, I have other priorities. Like, this is just something for fun. This is just silly. And just reached a point where it's like, you know what? I feel inspired to share this series. I don't know what's going to come out from it. I don't know how it's going to, help me with my business or help me with my clients or whatever, but I have wanted to share this for so long. I am just going to share it. And I just trust and know that it is going to support me in my other completely unrelated goals, right? My other goals are unrelated to like a Harry Potter series, but I'm just like, I'm going to take this inspired action because it's on my heart and I have so much to share. I'm going to share it. So when you're in that waiting place where you're waiting and you're taking inspired action and you're feeling good and you're, enjoying and excited about your day, then you know that you are in the proper position of waiting. If you're waiting and you're just feeling down and depressed and nothing's working and you're feeling bad, then you're in this position of waiting that is actually like, Allah is against me, nothing's going to work out, and all of that stuff. And what I would say is listen to my Deanspiration podcast where I get into that about dua. Okay. Again, that's in my free resources, Deanspiration, my Deanspiration podcast appearance, right? So the podcast is called Deanspiration and I was a guest on it. All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.